conversations, but the government is in a tricky position. They're in a bit of a bind because, of course, we have basically a caretaker government as things stand that's promised to not introduce any new major change of policy until the new administration is installed. Now, this is following convention, and it's something that the government committed to upon the resignation of Boris Johnson, that they would continue to follow
well,
through.
uncommit yourselves and stop following convention. It is a national emergency. Get on with it. Just do something. Be seen to do something.
Yes, and that's certainly clearly why this meeting is happening today. It's interesting to note the people who are conducting this meeting, Kwasi Kwarteng and Nadeem Zwahi, are both supporters of Liz Truss. So whilst they hold senior positions in this government, they also have one clear preference for the next Prime Minister. Happens to be the person who is currently the front runner, if the polls are to be believed, will probably be in that position. So I would be very surprised if there wasn't conversations going on between Kwasi Kwarteng, Nadeem Zwahi and indeed Liz Truss's team as well. But I would also be very surprised if there was a big change in policy before the 5th of September.
OK, you said change of policy, but does that mean then that the energy bosses who arrive have got to be, look, to save a big fight about all of this, they've got to be more receptive. So instead of putting the government ministers in a position where they're saying, we're going to do this, these guys have got to come in and say, well, they know they're going to do this eventually. So listen, chaps, we've come up with this idea. How does this sound? Do you see it being more conciliatory?
I think what was really interesting about Liz Truss's appearance on GBNews last night at the People's Forum, she said she wanted to work with energy companies to bring prices down. Now, that perhaps was a little bit of a precursor to what's going on today, and perhaps these industry discussions where ideas are flowing backwards and forwards might well be a precursor, might well be a way to change the dial before any legislation is needed, saying, well, Liz Truss is minded to do this were she to get in just a few weeks' time. Perhaps you need to buck up your ideas now, lest something like that happen. Perhaps these will be the sort of ideas being discussed now, but ultimately this is the start of a dialogue, not the end of a dialogue. This is the first time these companies have been brought in for this stage of this crisis. So I don't think we should expect any huge game-changing policies as a result of this, but certainly a positive step as the start of that dialogue.
Although, you know, all the mood music, I mean, we talk about Martin Lewis, the consumer expert, saying this is like the time before the pandemic when we were quite slow to react and we might have had better consequences if we'd been quicker. And Gordon Brown saying time and tide waits for nobody, and all this leadership contest is a distraction. That being said, of course, we've got the energy price cap rise coming in at the end of August, which kicks in October. Could that be something that could be tinkered with to try and change things? And also, just whilst we're talking about allies of Liz Truss, interesting to note that the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, he's now been appointed yesterday, we were being told, to brief whoever is going to become Prime Minister on this new package for cost of living.
Yes, Simon Clarke put out a statement yesterday as well, saying that the Treasury is currently pulling up various different ideas to present whoever comes in with these various different packages and ideas with what they could do pretty much straight away. Now, Simon Clarke is also backing Liz Truss in this leadership race, and he was saying that she would be minded to look very closely at what the Treasury was proposing. But I suppose in all of this, perhaps there was a bit of a Freudian slip there when you were talking about the energy price cap, adding in a slight R, because what happened with this price cap that was instituted not so many years ago under Theresa May, ever since it's been in, it's just risen and risen and risen. And it gets to the nub of the issue. Yes, you can institute a localised price cap in the United Kingdom, but that doesn't affect supply. That doesn't affect global prices. And so ultimately, trying to fix the cap in a way that doesn't affect supply, which is the issue, might not actually have that much effect. It hasn't worked in the past.
Well, it could also be problematic, because I was reading about the situation in Germany with Uniper. That is the biggest supplier of gas from Russia into the country. They had a price cap in Germany, but of course the costs going through the roof, and they just had to have a government-backed bailout of Uniper, 15 billion euros. So that could happen if we don't have a cap. And then if we don't raise... I mean, it's just a horrible situation.
It's an intractable mess. And what's really, really frustrating for many people about this situation is you look at all of the various costs that we're looking at now, the tens of billions of pounds that may well end up being spent. Of course, already 37 billion was being spent with the earlier lesser rise in this price cap. Well, if we look at the capital costs of, for example, a nuclear power station, or, for example, massively expanding our storage capacity, growing homegrown energy, much less than all the costs we're talking about now. If only we'd have had politicians with a bit more foresight over the last couple of decades, we might well be in the situation that France is in now. France getting 70% of its electricity from domestic nuclear power stations built decades ago, and they're in a much better situation for energy prices.